Welcome, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Melissa Doolan-Caney, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. If you are new to SignalFlare sessions, this series gathers industry greats, thinkers, and experts to discuss current and relatable industry challenges and news. Just like SignalFlare AI does, we take the best and the most valuable data and insights and distill it down to actionable and useful insights. We plan to do the same today. This is a series of webinars where we take the team of SignalFlare as hosts and share the knowledge and connections that we make with all of our friends to make a strong advocate and partner for the restaurant industry. So today we have Michael Lukianoff, our host and founder of SignalFlare AI. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Melissa.
And we also have an esteemed guest that is no stranger to me, my very longtime friend and former colleague, Victor Fernandez, Chief Insights Officer of Black Box Intelligence. Welcome, Victor.
Thanks, Melissa, and thank you for the invitation, Mike, as well.
Great to have you, Victor.
Well, before we get started, one, I want to just share that these two are probably the smartest ones in the room when they are in the room. And so I know we're going to learn a lot from the two of you today. As we're going through and talking, I just want to set the stage of all the data and insights that are going to be shared today and where those are coming from. So, Victor, do you mind sharing a little bit about Black Box Intelligence and where you glean the insights and data from?
Yeah, absolutely. So to give you some context, we've been around for a long time. It's been 30 years of Black Box Intelligence under different names, as Melissa well knows. But Black Box, the focus has always been 100% on restaurants. That's what we do. That's what we love, and that's where our focus is. And we pull the data directly from the source. That's the thing we lean into. There's different ways of looking at the data. I think we all kind of have a different piece of the pie. We look at it from different lenses, and the one we chose is we'll get the data directly from the brand. So we have relationships with we're close to 200 brands on the financial side, same thing on the workforce side, where they send us their data, workforce data, payroll exports. We get financial sales and traffic data directly from them on a weekly basis. And that's where we pull and compile all that information. And then we supplement that with what people are saying online from a review perspective. So all those online reviews that we hear from restaurants all the time that we read on Google primarily, but also Yelp, TripAdvisor, all the social media sites. We process those to understand what the guest sentiment is saying, and also directly from the guest through surveys. So kind of complementing the outcome, which is the sales and traffic, with where the guest is telling us what they felt, what they thought, what they liked, what they didn't like every time they went to a restaurant.
That's great. And Mike, do you mind sharing a little bit more where SignalFlare is gathering all their data and insights?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, very different approach. So we're taking data from mobile devices and also from credit cards. So we've got 180 million mobile devices that we're tracking. So we're tracking where people are starting their voyage, where they live, what other competitors they're visiting, where they go, who they are, what sort of demographics they have, and so forth. And we track about 600,000 restaurants. So we've got multiple trillions of visits. And then we've got credit card receipts for about 14 trillion credit cards. So we know how much they're spending when they go into restaurants. And we've been tracking that for over the course of about 5 years. Company's only been around for just under 3, so we're much younger than Black Box. We're also tracking local economic data. We're pulling in lots of different menus and prices and so forth. So we're really trying to layer in all of those economic and traffic factors that are going on in the local communities. What I love, I track everything that Victor reports about restaurants. I'm number one fan. I'm always tracking what's going on with Black Box. Any opportunity that we have to be able to integrate the two data sets, I get very excited because it really gives a full 360-degree view of these brands. So just being able to have this conversation with Victor, I get very excited.
Yeah, totally agree, Mike, and same here. We love what you guys are doing. And I always think, we all have a different lens into it. No one has the whole big picture, but the more pictures you have, the more complete, like you were saying, that 360 view. And just to clarify, I don't know if I made it clear, but the numbers I mentioned were chains that we're working with, right? Not 200 restaurants, but actually 200 restaurant chains. Our focus is 100% on restaurant chains.
That's great.
That's right. And I think that's, and to your point, it's the change, and it's directly from the brands, right? The mobile devices, it's a sample, and it's the foot traffic data. And we balance that out with the credit card receipts that also help us get, a little bit, a more of a view. But anytime we can also, work with you guys, and we also work directly with brands as well, but not, the size and scope that you do. So, when you combine that data together, just the total picture that you end up getting is just phenomenal.
Yeah, agreed. And this is a really good taste of the kind of insights that we're going to be sharing here in the next few minutes. So let's start off with a recap. We're first weekend of February of an interesting year, but I want to remind everybody what we went through last year. Mike, I was thinking back on our first SignalFlare session last year, and we had our really good friend Michael Bloomberg on.
Michael Halen at Bloomberg.
I know, call him Michael Bloomberg. He'll get a kick out of that. Michael Halen from Bloomberg, and we thought 2025 was going to be a pretty solid year. So I'd love to hear from the two of you. What's the verdict? Was 2025 a solid year?
Well, I would like to correct that a little bit. So Michael Halen and I didn't necessarily see things the same way. He had a much rosier outlook for the year than I did.
Yes.
And Michael, I was right. So, I'll just put that out there.
It's important to point that out. I would say, I think I was more aligned with Mike. Our view was that 2025 was not going to be the strongest of years. It was not, all the indicators pointed to not a great year. Now, I think if anything, it ended up being a little bit better than what we originally thought it was going to be. Like the first half was fairly good for restaurant spending, at least from our perspective. Still negative traffic, but that's what you always get in this environment. We've seen for many, many years in chain restaurants. But sales growth and traffic growth were improving the first half, and we were seeing, really good results. And then we hit a wall around July, and then we started seeing downward trends the second half of the year. So where we ended up is, somewhere in between the last couple of years. 2023 was better. Obviously we're coming out of COVID, so that was a strong year. 24 was weak. 25 was in between those two. So not the best of years, but not as bad as we originally thought it could be.
I know we're going to be talking about what we think is going to happen in 2026, but what kind of surprised you about what happened in 2025 from a consumer and workforce behaviors? Was there anything that kind of just really stood out as something that operators thought was going to happen but didn't?
I would say from my perspective, what was surprising, and I kind of hinted at it, I think, in my previous responses, is how resilient the consumer was. The fact that despite all the indicators pointing to a softer year, you saw consumer sentiment plummet in the beginning of the year around February, March. We saw economic uncertainty shoot up. People were getting more worried about inflation, more worried about their prospects from a job perspective. But despite that, we still saw that nice upward trend the first half of the year. I think, if anything, and that might be my personal view more than anything, but it's that the relationship with restaurants has changed for the consumer, and we rely on them for a lot more than we used to. It's not the, growing up, it was more that special occasion, and that, like you went out like once a week, maybe once a month, depending on who you were. But now it's like we depend on them for a lot of things, right? So people need to spend at restaurants, and we'll try to hold on to that spending as much as they can. One of the things that we found recently in our analysis was interesting, looking at days of the week, both for full service and limited service. The days of the week with the best comp sales results were Tuesday and Thursday. Then full service did well on Fridays, relatively speaking, and then limited service a little bit better on Mondays. That middle of the week, that kind of I'm sure, some value offerings, some special, offerings from restaurants help, but just that idea of when we're busy in our lifestyles, when we're out working, we're taking kids here and there for different activities, we rely on restaurants. We're tired at the end of the day. We order those meals whenever we need to. But more on the weekend might be where we saw a bit more of a pullback, more of that discretionary spending. So I think one of the to kind of summarize all of this, it was surprising how resilient the consumer was despite all the concerns there, and how we rely on restaurants so much, and we try to keep that spending as much as we can until realities of the economy kind of hit, and of course we got to make choices. But in general, people want to dine out of restaurants, I think.
That's interesting. Mike, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think what surprised me is that the brands, especially the big brands, didn't go deeper into the discounting well. I really expected that, and granted, you did see a lot more promotion, but I really expected that to blow up into a full-on discounting war toward the back half of the year when traffic count started to get pretty ugly, especially the trade down to grocery. But we didn't really see it full-blown in the way that I expected it to be, and we'll see how this year progresses. But we're still seeing food away from home inflation progressing at a pretty big clip, and that doesn't really appear to be subsiding.
That's interesting. I feel like 2025 was the year of the value perception and value. We heard that a whole lot. Victor, I remember hearing you talking a lot about it last year, knowing that the consumer was a little bit more sensitive to pricing and felt the squeeze on their wallets. Where do you think brands successively defended their value proposition? Where did you see it, and where did you see maybe it being eroded? Mike, I'm going to start with you on that one.
Well, I think that what you're seeing, and there was an interesting article actually out of Moody's where you're seeing that more and more spending is coming out of the highest echelon of consumer, the highest income consumer demographic. And that's being consolidated higher and higher. And the lower income demographic is making up less and less of the total spend. And we're seeing that manifesting in restaurants. So across, and people imagine when I say that oftentimes, oh, so that means that there's more fine dining spending and so forth, because of course, people with more money only eat at fine dining, right? That's not really how it manifests across segments, right? It means that, okay, well, maybe people who have more money, they might go for a more premium option when they eat at QSR, right? Or when they eat at fast casual, right? They're using all of the different segments. They might just not respond to the discount or the low end of the menu. So I think that there is a bit of a premiumization in some of these categories when you start to think about who your customer is, who's still coming in, because the bottom of the market has really dropped out.
Are you seeing that, Victor, in your data? A lot of times when you see the bottom of the market drop out, it starts to impact certain segments. What are you seeing at Black Box?
Interesting. Where last year, I'll call it the year of casual dining. Casual dining did amazingly well. Part of it was lapping over bad year in 2024, but we've all heard the stories of some brands in that space. I'm not going to name any names, but we all know who the big guys are there that are outperforming everybody else. So that was the story. But the second half of the year, we started to see casual dining growth eroding a little bit, and then family dining also kind of following the same pattern. And you start to see by the end of the year, fast casual flattening out in terms of their traffic performance. So they were not in downfall; they were kind of just keeping it. And then by December, you see QSR actually improving and doing better than most. So kind of those signals of when things are shifting, when things are a little bit worried about what's happening in the economy. For the year overall, kind of the summary is casual dining was number one, only segment that had positive comp traffic growth in our numbers. But when you look at after them, it was fast casual and was limited service. Both of them had positive comp sales. None of the other full service segments did have a positive sales growth. So definitely limited service brands doing better than most. And from a traffic perspective, also, it went casual dining, fast casual, quick service as the top three performing segments in the year. So casual dining is a little bit of an anomaly right now. And what's really interesting about it is, when you talk about value, the whole idea of them like not only getting the trade downs, but also the trade ups from some other consumers, right? They proved that there's not just one direction in which that can move, and that you could also attract from lower price points if you position yourself from the right standpoint. But yeah, we're starting to see that shift where limited service is better positioned, and we think continues to be better positioned in 2026, given all the different pressures the consumer is under.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Victor, right? The trade up, which I would call that value too, right? Because it's not price, right? But they are trading up because in some cases they're paying more for a better value because the overall experience for what they're paying might be better at a casual dining than something that's so close in price at a limited service place. They're just getting, they're getting better bang for their buck at some of these full service experiences.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that response, right? So Chipotle is coming out with their kind of value proposition of feeling like you're getting a lot of bang for your buck in what you spend at Chipotle, because in all honesty, that average check between casual dining and fast casual, it's a smaller gap now, which is really, really interesting. So people are trading up for experience. That makes a lot of sense. I'm
And
so curious, for the
I,
two of you have been tracking this data for both of you for 20 something years now. Like, that has changed over the years. We've always saw that the economy, one of the indicators is that you start to see or be the first to feel the impact. And now we're kind of seeing it flip. I'd love to get your take on that. And why do you think that's changed? I think it's the case shape economy, which you just explained, Mike. But Victor, any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I think so. And before going there, I just wanted to add to your previous question about, improving your value proposition or hurting on it. And I think Mike touched on it as well. I feel like it's two sides of the same coin of just using price as that only lever you think about when you think about value, right? If you just think, oh, I'm going to discount, I'm going to have some special offers, and that's it. That's where it ends. It's like you have to follow it up with execution. You have to follow it up with, people going and seeing, well, more expensive or cheaper, I'm getting my money's worth and more, right? In my mind, right? So that's where some brands have struggled with it. In terms of that flip, I think it's part of that relationship with restaurants I was talking about before. Is like, before is like, okay, things get expensive, things are bad, I'm just gonna stop going to restaurants. Now it's like, where can I still go to a restaurant and get a meal from? People are getting used to delivery, and delivery continues to grow despite, you would think, well, it's expensive, you get fees, you get tips, you get all those things, so people should be, moving away from delivery. We see in our numbers that actually, it's still growing, and it's growing at a fast rate. And even full service, it used to be more of a limited service thing. Now full service is starting to see some growth in delivery as well. And it's interesting where you see the trade downs happening in delivery as well. More growth in QSR than in other segments. People want to have that convenience, want to have that meal. So to answer your question, I think it's that we want to continue to consume at restaurants. We need to. It's part of the lifestyle. It's part of what we want to do. Now it's not a question of, am I going to stop eating at restaurants? It's more a question of, where can I still afford to go eat at a restaurant? We've been looking at the data for the last 10 years or so in terms of the relationship to inflation. Anytime inflation goes up, there's a relationship where quick service and fast casual start doing better, and then casual dining and family dining primarily start doing worse, from a sales growth, traffic growth perspective, just because people start trading down. Upscale casual gets a little bit of a negative effect, a little bit more far removed, and fine dining sees less of it, less of a relationship there. K-shaped economy is the logic there, right? They might see a little bit of a downturn, but it's not as marked as what we see for some other segments. So I think really it's really that relationship with restaurants, which now is so ingrained in our behavior.
No, that's great. I'm going to shift a little bit here because Mike, you just wrote a blog, and if you haven't checked out Mike's blog, I highly recommend it. He usually posts it over the weekend, and I'm always looking forward to reading it because it's so insightful. But Mike, you wrote a blog recently on the shift of population and where the shift is happening. Can you share a little bit about what the SignalFlare data saw in the shift of population?
Yeah, and and it's not just population; it's also restaurant growth.
Right.
And talking about and building on the question about the in other, say, downturns, the QSR in particular would have benefited so much. When we think about how we measure the industry, it's always same store sales. And if we dial back to 2020, when 20% of the restaurant industry closed, well, within a year, all of a sudden we're almost back to the same unit counts, but it wasn't the same distribution, right? Because if you had a drive-through, you were doing gangbusters. So guess where those new units were? They were all drive-through units. So all of a sudden, this equilibrium reshifted toward QSRs with drive-throughs. So, which continued to do really well, but they were all concentrated in these areas where there was high demand for it. So fast forward a little bit, where that growth trajectory continued. So we've had record growth in unit building that has been mostly limited service, not that many planned full service and fine dining and so forth. But simultaneously, population has been really slowing. And what we saw just this past year, the US population has really slowed to a crawl. So the most recent figures, that came out middle of last year, half a point in population growth, which is about as that's a crawl for us. Certain and cities that really were net growth from immigration, they're now at net negative. So when you factor in, population per restaurant in these communities, and you start putting together what the same store sales projection will be for next year, before we looked at these population, I had done a projection, and we were saying, look, industry is probably going to be a negative 3.2 to -4 on same-store sales coming into next year, just because of this new paradigm in restaurants to population. We're probably going to have to ratchet that down even more, just because of the number of people per restaurants. And depending on what your community is, it could look even worse. There are some communities that are terrific, right? But you could do the math, just in the community that you're in. Now, maybe you're in a segment that's it's got some scarcity and winds are in your favor, but you should really do the math and understand, your development plans and your competitive positioning, because these are the things that are going to really tell you what your starting place is going to be.
And Victor, I know you just did a report to all of your customers last week, and you saw a shift in some of these DMAs that are performing better than others, and you talked about that. What's your take on this?
Same in kind of findings in general. The fact that we're saturating the market that's already saturated. When we look at same numbers, in our case, just at chain restaurants, we're seeing that 36 states saw bigger growth in number of restaurants than population growth since 2022. In our data, also, you see fast casual growing at a very fast rate, about 15% over the period. Quick service up by about 6%. And these are big bases in terms of quick service. What's interesting is on the side of casual dining, we're actually seeing net loss of restaurants. It went down about 5.5% in terms of number of restaurants in that space. And that's part of the reason casual dining is doing better. It's just reevaluating, their portfolio. And so those restaurants were underperforming, and the fact that they're not there anymore is helping lift the performance for those chains. The other thing that's really interesting is where some of that growth is happening and where the restaurants are being put. Because when you look at income levels, we mapped the data from zip codes by income level to restaurants, and we saw that 38% of chain restaurants that we track are in the 25% of zip codes with the highest household income. And when you factor in, the next quartile, so half of the zip codes with the highest income have almost 2 out of every 3 chain restaurants at this point. So that is where the restaurants are being put. That's more saturation in those highly concentrated markets, and that's adding to that competition. And one of the reasons why it's so hard to keep those same store numbers up.
I feel that in Dallas. I feel like there's a new restaurant being built around my area every day, and there's something new to try, which as a consumer, I'm excited about, but it does make it hard to have a favorite that you go to on a regular basis. That definitely impacts traffic.
So if you got money, you better eat up, get another day part.
Yes, exactly.
Second dinner.
That's been very interesting too, is watching the day part analysis change and shift too. Victor, you talked about that, was it Tuesdays and Thursdays are like the most popular days?
Tuesday and Thursdays, yeah, is where we saw the best growth.
That's crazy. And then we've seen this kind of shift in day parts as well over the years, looking at the data for a long time. So it's fascinating seeing kind of the customers adapting to what's happening around them. So
And on that, let me let me add
Yeah.
a couple of data points. So when we looked at the data for 2025, the brands that had the best traffic, so we're looking at the top 25% brands based on their traffic growth in full service. One of the common, characteristics they had as brands is they had much higher lunch sales than their peers, and their dinner was pretty much flat, but they were really growing on that lunch occasion. So again, that middle of the week, maybe working a busy kind of mentality and going out for some food. And in limited service, it was those that were doing much better on breakfast and lunch as well. So,
Mhm.
that was interesting. Breakfast has been one that, coming out of COVID was impacted and people were working from home and all that. But it seems in limited services, it's coming back, and it's coming back at a big rate. At least those that are doing better, that's one of the ways they're doing it, is they're having an attractive breakfast offering for their guests.
That's good point. So let's shift to menu pricing, profitability, all of those fun things. So, Mike, what do you see was the biggest mistake restaurants made in pricing in 2025? What do you think you would try to have them avoid in 2026? That's a loaded question.
Biggest mistake. So it's not so different than than in years past, right? It's the doing too much or doing nothing at all. And when the world is moving, look, we're still in inflationary times. 2.9 to 3%. That's inflationary. And if you're standing still, and doing absolutely nothing, then you're going to wait until a point where all of the bad economics of your cost of goods and wage inflation and all the rest of that is going to force you to increase your prices more than the consumer is going to want to, and you're going to lose traffic counts. There's no avoiding that. So you have to do something, but you have to do something small and incremental. So it's threading a needle. And then there's the other side of it where they're just saying, okay, well, here's my cost of goods sold, and I'm going to pass 100% on to the customer. And that's just, they're going to have to live with it. And then they're losing, customer counts. Neither of those strategies work, right? You need to be measured. You need to understand how it's affecting your customer. You need to be very precise. You're not living in the same marketplace that you were 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. Things are moving very quickly. Markets are extremely saturated. Not all markets. So even if you've got a 10-unit chain, chances are that 3 of them are acting very differently than another 3 of them. So the way that you need to understand your micro markets is very different than you need to understand them just a couple of years ago. So it's a much more competitive market out there.
I totally agree with everything that Mike said, and one thing I'd add, and I don't know if you agree with this, Mike, but is the idea from a pricing perspective that it's an all or nothing proposition from a menu perspective, right? It's like, I'll increase 3% for all my menu items, or I will squeeze 0% or just 1%. Whereas, like, okay, you should know, if you look at if you understand your guest sentiment around your different items, well, these are doing well. People love them, order them all the time. They can take a little bit more. These ones, we were having trouble executing on it. So if we increase on those, we're going to kill that item, right? So being a little bit more strategic and surgical with those menu price increases also helps.
Absolutely. And this idea that, look, customers don't care about what your box economics, right? So if your avocado cost just went up, so you add a avocado premium, right? Avocado surcharge, they don't care. Maybe you increase your beverage, right? Or your side, or whatever it is, right? You need to be selective about where you think you can change your price, subtly, to try and get what you need to make the economics of your business work. But you need to do it in ways that, and maybe, you do something positive with the service, right? Maybe it's adding an element that actually elevates the experience so that you can charge more, so that they actually enjoy it, right? So this idea of premiumization.
I love that. So one of my favorite topics is alcohol sales. So, this has been an interesting topic as we've come out of COVID, and we've seen alcohol sales decline, especially in full service and fine dining. Do you two think that decline will continue to happen? And how do operators not lose in that area? Because that is an area that is so profitable for so many operators. How do they just gain momentum on their alcohol sales?
So I think alcohol has been hit by many factors, right? It's been not just one, but many that really have been playing a part in all this. So you have the economy. We were talking about managing checks down. We were talking about value. Talking about people being concerned about their finances. So one easy way to still go to a restaurant and spend a lot less is skipping that beverage, order water or soft drinks. So that's one that's definitely been a part. Now that's one that hopefully goes away. Hopefully, we go to a better state from an economic standpoint and people start, feeling better about themselves and their finances and that goes away a little bit. But then you got like just the overall trend of people wanting to drink less as a society, especially younger generations is apparently where that's happening the most. As parents, that's a good thing to hear. And then the other is it's just GLP-1s and the big effect that potentially has now and will have in the future. So I think those two last ones remain and maybe amplify a little bit. So it's a little bit of a here to stay phenomenon. And I think in terms of what they can do, I think you can do two things and you can do both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. One is like nothing says that a premium beverage has to have alcohol in it. And then that's where we hear a lot of brands already being really creative, really smart about it. Like the whole mocktail craze, will amplify it and will continue to be the growth avenue for a lot of those beverages, which even has the advantage that extends to everybody. Now you can be a family of 5 and everybody orders a mocktail that's, $8 versus ordering a Coke at $3. So there's that added bonus there. And then the other one is really for some brands to really double down on their identity as places where you want to have a good alcoholic beverage. And that's where people go and enjoy that beverage. We looked at the data and at least through the first half of 2025, those brands that were doing better on traffic, one of the things they were doing is they were preserving their beverage sales at a better rate. Cold sales were down for everybody. They were still down for those top performing brands, but they were losing at a slower rate than their competitors. So yes, maybe guests were managing their check down there. Maybe there's ordering a little less, but in general, people were saying, well, maybe the reason we're going there is because they have my favorite cocktail there. They have my favorite beer, and that's what I want to enjoy. Have the environment for it, be a place where that is part of your identity and your brand proposition, and that's what attracts the guests through your doors.
That's great.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Victor. I think that that point of having the premium non-alcoholic beverages that are handcrafted and custom made, we're seeing those, as it's got to be the right concept and it's got to be the right beverage, but we're seeing some really great success with that, because the younger generation they're not the heavy drinkers that say maybe my generation was.
Yeah.
Not that we were heavy drinkers, right? None of it's on film, but but it's very different, right? It is generational, and I think that's that's not likely to change. So that's that's structural. So if there is going to be a preservation of the economics of the beverage industry, it's going to come from a very different place.
Yeah, I go back to too is the whole idea of how important experience is, right? And those that do have beverage sales, how are you creating an experience that keeps people ordering and wanting to stay there? Just recently, I was at a restaurant and I had my first drink that had an imprinted picture on the front of it, on the top of it. It was called the Naughty Santa. And so it had a picture of Santa Claus on it, which was super fun. I ordered one and then others ordered. So it became very, very popular, and I'll probably go back because it's such a story and an experience. So I think it's past the normal. How are you bringing people into your room or your restaurant? It's really around those experiences that are going to keep people back. A match with great customer service, right?
And to that point, a lot of it is like, what can you create that you cannot create at home easily? And
Yes.
you cannot create, like, you're not going to draw a Santa I cannot draw a Santa on my beverages, at least for now. I'm going to try to learn. But, like the ambiance, those big screen TV throwing, 5 games at you at any given time, like all those things that you cannot do at home easily that the restaurant can't provide for you. And that's what they can lean on.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's get into technology and AI. Obviously, with the company name being SignalFlare.ai, we might have a few things to share about that. But before we get into the conversation, I do want to make a quick news update, which is really exciting. Those that haven't heard, SignalFlare AI is a founding sponsor of the MERTech AI Summit this March 11th in Las Vegas. It's a full day of education geared towards the non-technical executives. So if you are like me, you're learning about AI, you're curious, you know it's something that you really need in your operations, and you're learning more, this is a perfect place to go. So I highly recommend for you to go visit mertech.com and register, and you'll see Mike there, as well as so many others that are going to be doing some great education around AI. So there's my little plug. Among that, though, Mike, where do you see AI moving the needle today versus where it was even a year ago?
Yeah, I think this is a year where it becomes practical, creates efficiency, and real ROI, right? I think, a couple years ago it was novelty with Chat GPT, and you can create your own little Picasso, and it was fun when Chat GPT sort of hit your PC. Now we're seeing that with agentic AI and real business applications, that you can actually plug it into your database. You can have it actually run real business processes, and it can replace your database analysts and actually do the job of a workforce. And we've been developing stuff. We've been doing the tools that we're rolling out for our customers are tools that we've tested with our data scientists and our analysts internally. And every day I'm stunned at how much can be achieved with it. So we're really excited to be rolling it out to our customers. It is really, really changing the way that people are going to do work. I was talking to somebody just the other day, and some of us, and I think, the three of us anyway will appreciate this analogy, that it feels like the early 90s when you started working in Excel.
Mhm.
And, going from calculator with a bunch of chits that you're putting into a ledger to putting all of that into Excel and working with formulas. It's that kind of a productivity revolution when you start putting all of that into these, AI, um, agents lining up and doing all of that work for you. It's that big a change.
So when we talk about data, you guys have spent your whole career looking at data. I mean, what's the difference in having more data to make better decisions? I feel like that's the constant question that you'll hear, especially as people are looking for better decision making through data, is what do I look at? There's so much out there. What do I pay attention to? I'm confused on where to go to, and how do we pull the data out of silos to make really good business decisions? So what are you seeing in this, and where do you see, what's advice that you can give to brands on how they should better manage their data right now?
I would say, there's several ways in which you can use data. One is like backwards looking, right? Just more for reporting. I need to go and report to the board, to my boss, to whoever it is. Like, we did better or worse than last year, and what's going on there. And that's important. But I think the real value and what we're all trying to move towards is the data that really explains. I always think about these key questions when thinking about the data is like, what happened, where did it happen, and why did it happen, right? If you start answering those questions, that's when you start moving the needle and understanding it. And I think you're absolutely right when you talked about the silos. I think the moment you have like all these different data sets that are separate, that's where it's hard. The real values in those intersections, when you start putting those data sets together, and when you start integrating and you start seeing when this happens, well, this happens in general. But then the other thing that I think is really important is for every, and it takes some work. It's not, easy necessarily, but just for every brand, there are some numbers, some metrics, some variables that matter more than others. It's part of their identity, it's part of their customer demographics, it's part of their DNA as a brand. But understanding what those are, and tracking them over time, and not necessarily, discounting everything else, but that, there's, you could chase 100 different data points every single day, but yes, brand, you need to know, like, okay, out of all of that, we know that we're successful when A, B, and C happens. So those are the metrics that we really need to keep an eye on and track every single day.
Yeah, I think that the key to forward success is making sure that whether it's dashboards, data sources, is it the old model where it's the walled garden where you're in my ecosystem and everything needs to stay in my ecosystem? Or are they vendors who understand that the data needs to come together? And so therefore they're working with open APIs, they're working in systems like a Snowflake, where you know that if you've got a bunch of vendors who are working together, that it's really easy to do secure table sharing and these kinds of things. There's lots of different infrastructures that lend themselves very well to that. And when you hear a couple of different names, you know, okay, these vendors, I know these data sources are going to be really easy to merge together. And therefore, that means that I'm going to have access to my data and I'm going to be much closer to being able to use AI and the future technologies and use my data together. And if they don't have those sort of key elements, then it's going to be a lot harder for me to be pulling my data out, putting them into Excel sheets, or I'm sort of on my own, on an island of munging data with a bunch of a bunch of analysts, with doing it the old way.
I'm curious to the two of you and what you're seeing as far as who's owning this process and bringing all this data together outside of silos. A lot of times that will fall into IT. A lot of times it's marketing or finance. And then we're also seeing a lot of companies start to have a different department that really owns the data sciences. What are you two seeing from your perspective that works well?
I think it depends a lot on the organization. I think the larger organizations, they have, data engineering teams, and they've got departments that are set up for this, and they're building these these integrations. Smaller organizations trying to figure out how to how to change, right? Because the old data warehouses aren't set up for this new concept of, not just, integrated data sharing, but this whole concept of a knowledge base, which is not the same thing as a database, right? It's about how do or a data lake, right? It's about how do I take my structured and my unstructured data and then tie it into AI systems so that the organizational learning actually loops back through it. So it's a whole new frontier. And I think that, that's one of the things that, we're trying to help teach our customers how to set up, and, how we can help them to be a part of that. But there aren't a lot of companies right now that are on the forefront of that right now. But tools like like a Snowflake, I think Databricks can help with helps with the infrastructure for that. AWS has tools for that, but being able to set that up yourself, there aren't a lot of, say, restaurant companies that that have the internal ability to be able to do that.
I think the partnership piece of this too is that I know a lot of times I remember talking about this at Black Box as well as SignalFlare, is that a lot of the times you hear that big companies have access to so much, so they're able to move faster and quicker. But I do believe that having great partnerships with companies like ours, there's more access to data than ever before. So it's not just for the big guys to be able to compete in that space. So I think there's some exciting things happening in that arena, especially with AI, that'll give people more momentum to make better decisions. They'll have more at their fingertips to do it with.
For sure.
Okay, we are wrapping up, and I know I've enjoyed these last few minutes with you all. Well, let's focus on 2026, and we are now 11 months to go, and we know that every single data trend will tell you that 2026 could potentially look different from 2025. What are the two of you seeing? And what do you anticipate?
We're anticipating a softer year in 2026. We think it's going to be worse than in 2025. It comes from the economy. We've been tracking different variables, and when you look at consumer spending growth, disposable income growth, unemployment expectations, inflation expectations, all of that points to a weaker year, and the consumer is not very optimistic right now. So that is pointing towards that. We saw the second half of last year show that trend already, and we think that carries over into 2026, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I agree with Victor. As I said before, I think that even just structurally in terms of restaurant growth and population, you're starting off at a pretty at a lower level, and you factor in just the general economic sort of malaise. It doesn't bode well for a terrific 2026.
Well, let's not end with depressing news. Let's end with what are some things that you two think leadership teams and CEOs should be working on from a strategic bet for 2026 that could help them kind of beat out the market?
I would say one that sounds a little counterintuitive, but that always is one thing we should be kind of leaning into is investing in the people, especially in the leaders within the restaurants. In tough years, the first reaction is to we need to cut costs, we need to cut training, we need to cut like all these programs we had. But anything we look at the data through different lenses, and anytime, for example, value, and you think about value, what does people think value is? But you look at what they're really talking about in those reviews when they say they had a great value. They're talking about the attentiveness and the attitude of the people. They're talking about the taste of the food. They're talking about the consistency of the experience. At the end of the day, we're a people-driven business. So one way to drive value is really, provide a great experience, and it comes through those people. So I would say investing in that workforce.
I think you have to go local and plan realistically. If you understand your micro market really well, and you look at it and you know your demographics and you know your guests and you understand your saturation, then be realistic about which customers you're going to not have this year. Because if you're not realistic about it, then you think you're chasing after customer counts that you just can't get, and then target differently. There are certain customers who are going to fall out of the experience, and there are certain customers who are going to be just fine. This year, actually, with tax policy and so on and so forth, there are markets where there's going to be customers with more money in their pocket. Go after those customers, even if that's not normally the customer that you go after, because those customers could backfill some of the customers that you're going to lose. If you keep going after the customer who's going to fall out of the experience anyway, you're not going to get them to come in. They're not going to come in for another frequency cycle. So maybe go after a customer who's actually flush with cash.
That's great feedback. I know that when people listen to this, they'll understand why the two of you are usually the smartest ones in the room. And so I thank you both so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thank you, Victor, so much for joining Mike and I. And thank you all for listening in and engaging in our discussion. To further these conversations and follow along with us, I invite you to follow SignalFlare.ai on LinkedIn and check out our website. And you'll find lots of ways to get a hold of us. I also have some exciting product updates from SignalFlare. We are including our new Navigator product, where you'll be among one of the first to experience our AI agents built to generate insights and predict outcomes to collaboratively find a path forward for you to grow your brand. And you can sign up for that at SignalFlare.ai and be one of the first to start using it. And one last reminder to join us in Vegas in March for the MerTech conference, where we'll be diving into the rapid acceleration of AI. Again, this is open to all operators, so you don't have to be a tech person to know and dive in with us. And join us for our next SignalFlare session. We're always working hard to build content to help you with these really interesting times. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us with your questions and suggestions. We want all content and to inform you to make better business decisions. We thank you so much for your time and have a great day.